for bed. Thanks for joining. So, we're continuing our topic on marriage conversations, and we are talking today about communication killers, which are important to be able to identify in marriage, in any relationship, but specifically in marriage. You guys, today is one of those days. My warning came up for 10% left on my iPad, so I'm gonna have to get through this quick, guys. Okay. So, all right. So the first thing is talking too much. I know it sounds a little bit crazy because we're talking about communication, but talking too much. So when you're in a conversation with your husband, with your boyfriend, your spouse, whomever, and you're doing all the talking, and he can't get a word in edgewise, that's a problem. That's a problem, you guys. We want to make sure that we are letting our husbands, our spouses know that we want them, that there's two sides to this communication deal, right? We need to allow them space to feel comfortable to join the conversation. It shouldn't be a dialogue, or it shouldn't be a monologue. It should be a dialogue, right? So make sure that when you are having a conversation, when you're trying to communicate with your husband, that you are, or your spouse, make sure that you are leaving the window open, leaving the door open for him to join you in this communication, in this act of communication, in this conversation. Because basically when you are doing all the talking, you're not listening. It's impossible to listen and talk at the same time. You might catch bits and pieces of what your spouse is saying, but you're not fully listening if you're talking. You're not. In ninth grade, our teacher did an experiment with our class. He had one student come up, and then he was talking to the student about something, and then he had another student come up and also start talking to the student about something. So the student's standing in the middle, the teacher's here, another student's here, and they're both talking about two completely random opposite subjects, right? And then at the end of this lasted maybe 3 minutes. At the end of this, the teacher asked the student, okay, what was I talking about? And he asked him for specifics. And then the other student said, what was I talking about? And asked him for specifics. And the student in the middle was like, he caught bits and pieces, but he didn't fully grasp any of what either person was saying. So it was a great example of how we might think that we're giving our full, we might be listening, but it's hard to listen to two things at once, and it's hard to understand what somebody else is saying when you're talking, when you're doing the talking. So make sure that you're not talking while the other person is talking. Give them space to talk. And then sometimes, you know what, you guys, when we talk a lot, it can sometimes be an indicator that we don't know what we're talking about. You know, have you ever talked to somebody and they're going on and on and on, and at some point you're like, what are you even talking about? Like they're talking in circles, or is that me, you guys? Am I talking about myself? No, but have you ever talked to someone, it's just like the more they talk, the more you realize, okay, they don't know what they're talking about, right? So even more reason for you to allow the person that you're talking to, your spouse, to get a word in, to communicate back to you, to join the conversation. And then again, I mean, most of us just don't realize how much we talk and we fail to listen. We're so busy trying to get our point across that we fail to understand the other person's point of view or what they're saying. You know, so number one, A, is talking too much. Make sure we're not talking too much. Make sure that we're allowing our spouse to get a word in and communicate how they feel about whatever it is we're talking about as well. The second is not saying enough. It's a communication killer if you're not saying enough, if you're not joining conversation, if you're not even showing interest in joining in on the conversation. That's a communication killer. And I think many wives, many girlfriends, that's one of our biggest complaints. It's like, you're not talking to me. You need to tell me when you feel like this. You need to, you know what I mean? So, I mean, this kind of points back to number one. Are you allowing your spouse an opportunity to talk to you? You know, we need to seriously ask ourselves that question. But as the spouse on the other side, bonsoir, is that what that says? I don't know. On the other side, both parties need to join in the conversation. And the reason that it's important not to be, you know, one of those people that just sits and listens and doesn't say anything, doesn't ever give a response. The reason it's important not to be like that is because it leaves a lot for your spouse to question. You know, it leaves her kind of drawing her own conclusions. I don't speak French. I'm sorry. But I wish that did. It looks so pretty. It says te levant. I don't know. But no, it's truly, if you're not communicating with your spouse, it raises a question and it leaves too much for her to draw her own conclusions around. Right? Oh. So make sure that you are allowing your spouse to talk to you, but when you're listening, make sure that you're actively responding back to them so that they know, okay, you are listening. You do have an opinion about this. You do care about what we're talking about. I think it's really important when you are especially talking about situations that are pertaining to issues, problems in the marriage. If you're just the one that just sits there and doesn't really say too much, you just kind of listen and, you listen to like this lecture, you're not saying too much. Again, it leaves your spouse questioning, do you care? Are you listening? And it kind of opens the window for her to start to have some trust issues, because trust is gained, trust is earned, right? And it's earned in a relationship, in a marriage, when you are both equally kind of sharing intimate things about yourself. If you're the only one in a relationship talking about your deepest, darkest secrets, it's hard for you, and your spouse is never telling you anything, always keeping everything to themselves. It's hard for you to feel like you can trust them. You know what I mean? Because they're not sharing anything with you. So you're the one that's vulnerable, and they're over here not vulnerable because they haven't told you anything. So it just, when you're communicating, make sure that you voice your opinion, voice how you feel about things, because it adds to the whole trust bucket that you and your spouse are building, in your relationship. Communication is key. Sharing your feelings about certain things is key because it builds trust. Vulnerability builds trust. It just does. So make sure that you are not falling into the trap of just not saying anything because you want your spouse to hurry up and finish whatever it is she has to say. Make sure that you're saying your part too, expressing how you feel. Because unless you say anything, she's not going to know how you feel. And the conversation will continue and continue and continue. And you'll still be sitting there listening and listening. So share how you feel. Get it off your chest. Let her know. And the other thing is that when you're the one doing all the sharing and you're the one that's always, communicating how you feel, you start to feel a little bit like your spouse may not trust you. Your spouse may not trust you with the intimacies of his life, the things that go on in his head. So when you share things, when you get them off your chest, thank you, LaShonda, it helps to strengthen that trust factor in marriage. So make sure you're doing that when you're communicating. I'm looking at my notes, guys. I have my little handbook here. My little notebook, I mean. Okay. The third thing, you guys, is exaggeration. So how many of us have heard of that story of the boy who cried wolf? Yeah, it's not necessarily along the same lines, but it kind of is along the same lines. Exaggeration. When you're talking to your spouse or somebody about something that went on at work, don't exaggerate. Be honest about what happened. Communicate accurately what happened so that again, you're building trust. If you've experienced something with your wife, say you guys got into a car accident and it was just a fender bender, right? But you go telling your mom and your uncle and your cousin, oh my gosh, my car is totaled, and your wife is gonna think that's actually not what happened, and she's processing all of this like, why are you exaggerating? Why are you not being honest with what happened? And it makes her wonder if there are other areas in your relationship that you're exaggerating. If there are other things that you're not communicating fully accurately. So making sure that you're not exaggerating, different situations is really important. Again, it builds that trust factor in the marriage, in the relationship. So make sure you're not over-exaggerating. And again, because it's hard for your spouse to trust you. You guys, I'm kind of going through these a little bit quick because my battery is going to die on my iPad. Okay, so the fourth thing is blaming. Okay, so when you blame someone, it makes them feel like, that makes them defensive automatically. And it's such a common thing for us to do when we don't want to accept responsibility for something, when we don't want to, when it's embarrassing, when we're in an embarrassing situation, we don't want to accept blame for, we don't want to, highlight the fact that we might be deficient in an area. It's hard to do. It's hard to accept blame. And you guys, this has been happening since Adam and Eve, Adam blamed Eve and Eve blamed the serpent. So this isn't anything new, but it's something that that happens in marriage, and we have to address it. We have to make sure that when we find ourselves looking to point the blame, that we have to first assess, okay, what is it that I'm doing to play a part in this? Because clearly you're doing something. Whenever there's an issue, there's two parties involved at least. So there's your part, what you did, what your involvement was, and there was your spouse or whoever else. So make sure that you're accurately assigning blame, but you're not doing it in a way that's like, pointing your finger and being aggressive and angry and all this kind of stuff. Do it in a way that makes, that gets your point across, but that is, in a loving way. So, again, when we don't want to accept responsibility, we point the finger and we blame. Most of the times we blame our spouse. We were late because you didn't want to wake up. We forgot to buy my sister a baby shower gift because we didn't bring a gift because you forgot to go to the bank. We like to assign blame when things happen, but forgetting that we also play a role in that. I could have very easily gotten up an hour earlier to make sure we were all where we needed to be on time. I could have very easily taken myself to the ATM and to Babies R Us and gotten a baby shower gift for my sister, So we need to make sure that we're taking responsibility when it makes sense. The other thing is anger. The fifth thing is anger. And we talked a little bit about this yesterday, but it's easy to point our anger at a person, but we should be pointing our anger at the act, at the sin, at whatever it was that the person did, and not the person directly. And that is super hard, you guys. It's super hard to do that, but it's something that we have to do as Christians, as people, as believers, as people who say that we are trying to walk the Christian walk. When we're angry, we need to point our blame to the act, to the behavior, and not the person themselves. And something that is really key about this, I was thinking about this, and something that's really key about this is we all know that the enemy will try to get his foot in any way he can, right? And anger is one of the easiest ways that the enemy slips into our relationships, slips into our hearts, and allows us to start feeling a divide between ourselves and our husbands. So it's super important that when we're angry, we are addressing our anger to an issue, to an action, to a behavior, and not assigning it to a person, not assigning it to our spouse. Because like I said, that is the easiest way for the enemy to come in and start to plant seeds of divide in our marriage. When you're angry, who knows what's going to happen. So we want to make sure, again, that you're not pointing that anger towards your husband. You may be mad as, I don't know what, that, he did something, but be mad at what he did, not at him. And it's hard, you guys. I'm not telling you it's going to be easy. Marriage isn't easy. Whoever told you marriage was easy, they lied. They lied to you. Marriage is not easy. But to my point, make sure that you are assigning your anger to an action, a behavior, not your husband, not your spouse. The enemy will come in, plant those seeds of divide, and before you know it, you'll be in divorce court. I tell you the truth. I tell you the truth, guys. So make sure when you're angry, again, you need to, like I said, these are communication killers. Anger is a communication killer. It's a marriage killer, you guys. So make sure that you're communicating in a way that's not, whoa, Johnny's over here playing director. Make sure that you're communicating in a way that's not harming your husband's heart. Yeah, your spouse is not the enemy. Your spouse is not the enemy, you guys. It's the actions, it's the, little things that creep into him